Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very thrilled to welcome David Fear of Rolling Stone magazine to the podcast today to talk about a big one, The French Connection, starring Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider, directed by William Friedkin, the Academy Award winner for Best Picture, Director, and Actor, 1971. How are we doing, David?
We're doing great. Thanks so much for having me on. I have to say I have a fondness for this podcast because this was the year I was born.
Oh, very cool. 1971. It's been our focus since February.
A critic at 50 talking about movies at 50. It all just feels it's like synchronicity with the police. Sting and the Police used to call synchronicity.
So yeah, if you were born in 71, you probably didn't see The French Connection when it opened.
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did?
Just kidding.
This was like your first experience.
We can get into my formative film going years in the 70s if you'd like, but no, this was a film that it's a film that I caught up with later on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's get started kind of at the beginning. Like what made you get involved in film? Like what has been your role with film like since you were young and how you came to be a real fan of the medium?
Oh God. So this is a 7-hour podcast. Okay, great. We'll have enough time to cover this then. I mean, it's weird. I have one very formative experience that I think is shared by a lot of people around my age. In that, in fact, it's funny. I was having a conversation about this when I met the woman who became my wife many years later, and she'd had almost the exact same experience. But I remember an experience where I would have been first grade, and my parents pulled myself and my sisters, my two younger sisters, out of school to go take us to see a matinee of Star Wars.
Okay.
And you know, emerging, like I was 6 years old at the time, so walking out of a matinee of, first off, I got pulled out of school to go to the movies.
You're out of school, like, first of all, yeah.
Yeah, I think my parents had taken me to movies at that point. In fact, I'll give you an origin story in a second, but like at one point, I remember I have this very vivid memory of just being pulled out of school and being taken to the movies, and then walking out of that just having my DNA scrambled, like a 6-year-old seeing Star Wars when barely any people knew who Star Wars. I think it was like maybe the third week of the run. Okay. So my parents had kind of heard that it was a phenomena, and it was maybe the only time they were going to get to see it. But it was just, you know, that was mind blowing. But even apart from that, I'm not a person who views the Star Wars films the Star Wars universe as like a sort of religion. I was into films for as long as I can remember, and I have very vivid memories of pouring through the newspaper. I grew up in San Jose, California, which is at that point was like a medium-sized city. It wasn't Silicon Valley yet. It was a medium-sized city that was going to soon be a much bigger city. And I have very vivid memories of being a kid and just like pouring through the movie section of our newspaper and staring at posters of things and being like, I don't know what that movie is, but I even though and I'm like 8, but I want to see it. And just kind of like, it was just this thing where I kind of studied it like the Talmud. The origin story that's part of the family lore. And at this point, you know, I just print the legend. I have no idea whether it's true or not. But the story my parents tell me is that when they had me, you know, they were new parents. I was the first kid. They had a baby. They didn't get a chance to go out a lot, but they decided they were going to go see The Godfather. And at this point, The Godfather had been out for a while, and it was playing in a drive-in. So they had the bright idea to be like, let's take the baby to go see The Godfather. We're in a drive. It's just, we'll have the baby in the car. It's not like we're bringing the baby into a theater. We're not monsters.
Yeah.
And so we'll go and you know, take the kid, and hopefully the kid will sleep, and you know, we'll be able to actually see this movie that everybody's been talking about for, you know, close to a year. So they go, and apparently the way the story goes is that I'm fussy and I'm crying, and they're at the drive-in, and like I'm you know, doing what angry babies do, and both of them are like, there's no way we're going to be able, like, we're going to have to leave. This is just absolutely, if he doesn't calm down, this is ridiculous. And then everything goes dark in the drive-in,
Mm-hmm.
as dark as you can get in a drive-in, and the movie comes on, and Nina Rota's score, that beautiful score, starts
Mm-hmm.
up, and apparently I stopped crying,
You went, oh,
and
I want to watch this.
like, and just like looked out. They said like I just kind of stopped what I was doing and looked out the window, and that I stayed awake and didn't make a sound apparently
Wow.
for the entire time, the entire running time of The Godfather, which, as you know, is a long movie.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that the minute that the film was over, and the credits started rolling, I then just closed my eyes and went to sleep.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that film
So
came out in March of 72, so it would have been
yeah,
just a few months after you were born.
yeah, and I think it. I would have placed it around maybe the late summer of '73 when they took me
Oh, okay.
to.
God, it was still
So I would
playing
have.
in summer of 73.
I mean, dude,
Wow.
this was. I mean, this was back when movies played for
Forever.
successful movies played forever
Yeah.
at multiplexes and drive-ins and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe, or maybe it was a little sooner in the run. So they said I was still very much a baby and not a toddler.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then from there, it was an adolescence. I grew up in the '80s, so it was like you go
Mm-hmm.
see the Spielberg films, and then I was a big horror fanatic growing up
Mm-hmm.
as a kid. I was part of the first generation that had VCRs,
Okay. Yep.
which was a massive. I mean, like, talk about game changing, because suddenly all these movies that I'd been seeing in I would fixate on this poster. We'll get along to the French Connection eventually, but like I would fixate on this poster as a kid of like all I could see was it was a jack-o'-lantern
Uh-huh.
kind of tilted slightly to the side, and there was a big butcher knife by the side of it, and it just said, I can't remember the exact tagline, but it was something like, tonight he comes home, and it
The
was like
night
Halloween,
he came
the
home.
night he came home,
Mm-hmm.
and at Halloween, and as like an 8-year-old kid, a 9-year-old kid, I was just sort of like, oh my god, like what is this? Looks so scary. I gotta see this. And when VCRs came out,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly like you could go to a video store, and it was like being in a library if you were a bookworm.
Yep.
And that was the very first movie I rent. I have a very vivid memory of like finding the box for Halloween, and this would have been like 81, I guess, 82
Okay.
maybe. And like taking it up to the counter and like taking it home and being like, I can watch I can finally see Halloween. And that was actually how I caught up on a lot of stuff. Like I was lucky in that I had permissive but not too permissive parents,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a mom who was a huge movie lover.
Okay.
So there was one day out of the week when I was in elementary school going into middle school, where
Mm-hmm.
they would have an early day. And my mom also worked for the school system.
Mm-hmm.
So she would come pick me up from school early on like a Thursday, because it would get out at noon instead of 3, and we would go to the movies. We would do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom would take me, she wouldn't just take me to like movies that you would take a kid to. She would take me to all sorts of movies. So
Mm-hmm.
I have a very vivid memory of my mom taking me to see like California Suite, as a
Yep.
kid. And another time, like my mom took me to go see like Same Time Next Year, which again,
Yep.
not a movie you really take like a 9-year-old kid to, but she knew that and then we would go have like lunch, or if it was a little bit later in the afternoon, like an early dinner afterwards, and I would ask her
Mm-hmm.
questions about it, and we would just talk about things. And that's really where it kind of like the idea that you didn't just passively see a movie, you
Yeah.
actually kind of talked about it, and that there were things to kind of unpack from it
Mm-hmm.
and go that. And it really, I mean, kind of what I do now really kind of starts there.
Yeah. That's so cool that you had a mother who recognized that early on, that I can take him to maybe a non like genre film, something like
Yeah.
a California Suite, and
Yeah.
actually and talk about it over food afterwards. That's really cool. I had the same thing with my dad. He would take me to all kinds of movies that maybe I shouldn't have seen when I was young. Like he took me to
Right.
Eyes Wide Shut when I was 14. And my mom did not want him to take me to that. And I said, Mom, it's Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
Please let me go. And so
Yeah.
and so they could recognize that early on I had an interest in this medium that went beyond your typical like, oh, I like movies. Like there was more to
Right.
it than that.
Yeah, and there's something really wonderful about it. It's a weird kind of entry into an adult world.
Oh yeah.
that you can kind of just dip your toe into as opposed to diving in head first. And this extended to the VCR era, because then it meant like all these movies that my mom had seen already that were favorites of hers would then be like, okay, we're gonna have movie night and we're gonna watch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I was like, great, I love Jack Nicholson. Like, let's, 10 years old and I've been dying to see this. Let's check this out.
Yeah.
And that's actually how I saw The French Connection for the first time.
Okay, so yeah, take me back to when you saw it the first time. How old were you, and you watched it on VHS?
I did.
Okay.
And it was one of those movies. I mean, again, too, like for Christmas, I would get, it wasn't the Leonard Maltin guide at that point, but it would be like these, the kind of books that you would find at bookstores on like the sale table for, $3.
Yeah.
But it would essentially be like the kind of like a Hallowell guide, the version of that, where it would just be like 1,001 movies you should see, or
right,
all the consumer's guide to movies. And it was all these titles and pictures and blurbs, and I would just kind of pour through it as like, a 10 or 11-year-old kid and be like, what's this movie about? This picture looks interesting. This guy's got a gun. This person's yelling at somebody. There's a monster. Like, what are these things? What are these films? And so for years, The French Connection existed in my tiny little child brain as the movie where some guy got shot on the stairs.
Shot in the back. Yeah.
Shot in the back on the stairs. That's all I knew about it. But very clearly there's something so, and then, with the font and everything in the poster, there was something so like visceral about that shot. And so then finally when it was like, oh, we're going to watch The French Connection tonight, I was like, I couldn't wait for it. And I just dove right into it. I think I would have been about 12. Okay. 12, maybe 13, but I'm going to say 12. And just really kind of like really taking to it for so many reasons. I had seen cop shows, but I had never seen a movie where that was like a cop show, except the cop was a jerk. Not even a jerk. Like it was very much like Fisher Price, My First Antihero. Right. And kind of glomming onto that and being like, oh, you don't have to, like, even somebody like R.P. McMurphy, there's a kind of roguish anti-authoritarian charm to him that when you're watching him take on the establishment, you can still kind of root for him. Whereas with Popeye Doyle, like it's actually really kind of hard to root for him. And yet, at least when I was younger, like I did, like it was very clear who was the person you were supposed to be following in this movie. And it's not Fernando Rey, and it's not, a lot of the other people on the sidelines. It's not Sal or Angie. It's very much like Popeye. Yeah. So like and it's one of those things, like I would just keep going back to it, kind of over the years. Yeah, I saw it the first time. I want to say I was in high school. There was a period where I was trying to see a lot of the Best Picture winners from the Oscars. And so I just was like going through the list from the 70s. And I think I knew who Gene Hackman was. So I was like, oh, I would like to check this one out. And yeah, I remember it kind of blew my mind. I hadn't really seen a whole lot of like older films like this one when I was younger. And you could tell that there was something really striking about this one. But as I was telling you before we started recording, I had not watched this in a long time. It might have even been since high school. So it was kind of like discovering a brand new movie last night. Outside of the car chase, I really didn't remember much. So it was a lot of fun, as we'll get into. Well, especially too, like I'm not a native of New York. Like I came to New York in the early 2000s. And but I, as many of us did, like I grew up watching New York movies. And to see The French Connection as like a kid living in the suburbs in California. And like that's real. I mean, like French Connection is real, like Lindsay era horror city, like New York filmmaking. It's very much like, that new Hollywood version of New York, where it's just gritty and dirty, and it's just got that kind of like vibe to it. Yeah. Like just watching it then and being sort of like, oh wow, New York, that's what New York is. And now having lived in New York for, close to like going on 20 years, it's entirely different to like go back to it and be sort of like, oh yeah, that was the New York of the 70s. It's so incredibly different than the New York I live in now. Like, I think I know where that corner is. I know that I'm sure that shoe store is not there anymore. Like it's an entirely different experience. Yeah, I believe I read that there were no sets in this movie. This is all like on location for the whole running time. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. I mean, Friedkin came from documentary filmmaking. Right. like a lot of filmmakers of his age and his generation, like he got started off, he kind of had what seems like a dual career, starting off of like making documentaries,
Mhm.
shorts,
Yep.
and getting involved in like TV, and
Right.
kind of like,
Mhm.
you know, making his bones there, cutting his teeth there.
Yeah.
So it actually doesn't surprise me that a lot of those scenes, I mean, at least the exteriors, I can't speak to any of the interiors. I don't know. I, it wouldn't surprise me if Friedkin was like so meticulous that he was like, we actually have to find some like the guy who checks the drugs for purity. We have to find a real chemist lab with an actual
Yeah.
guy that would do this.
No, a non-actor. We need
A
the real guy.
non-actor. For verisimilitude's sake, we need to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for the exteriors, like, and I think it shows. I mean, I really
Oh
think
yeah.
that it makes such a huge difference in terms of like the "you are there" feeling of that
Yeah.
movie.
What I find interesting is that we talked about Shaft this past summer, which came out in the summer of 71. And my big kind of takeaway with that movie was just how striking a lot of the location filming was in that.
Yeah.
And the writer of The French Connection, Ernest Tidyman, is also the person who wrote Shaft and wrote the novel Shaft. So he was also the writer of The French Connection. That's kind of how it got started.
Oh my God, it's all coming together, man.
There's definitely some similarities there between the two movies, especially with its
The
location,
Tidyson
filming.
universe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, this was not William Friedkin's first movie. I think some people might think, since he was pretty young when he made this, like 34, 35, that this might have been, the first film or the second film. He was making theatrical feature films as early as like the mid 60s. I haven't seen his early work, like Good Times, The Birthday Party, The Night They Raided Minsky's. Have you seen any
Yeah,
of those?
I think I've seen all of those.
Oh, you've seen all of those?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Harold Pinter fan, so
Okay.
I sought out his version of The Birthday Party
Okay.
a while back, and it was pretty great. I remember seeing The Boys in the Band.
Boys in the Band was the film before this that he
The
directed,
film right
1970.
before this,
Mhm.
right? That was another like VHS discovery.
Yeah.
Where it was one of those films I just kept reading about, and then was like, oh, it's the guy who did The French Connection, The Exorcist, and you watch it, and you're sort of like, wow, this was not. Yeah, I'm glad I saw this, but this was not what I expected.
Yeah,
The Night
it's
Who Raided
wild.
Minsky's is a lot of fun, especially if you know it in the context of Friedkin's other films.
Okay.
Even Friedkin has disavowed Good Times, and it's the great cinematic document of Sonny and Cher in their kind of pre-variety show heyday.
God, is that the Sonny and Cher film?
It's the Sonny and Cher movie.
Oh
Yeah.
God. Oh my, that was his first feature. Like that's like, or at least theatrically. That was like very early on.
I think he'd done like feature length stuff for like American Playhouse, or
Yeah.
He'd done, I don't know if he'd done live TV the way that like Sidney Lumet and a lot of those guys did, but he cut his teeth in TV. I think he said he directed the last Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode.
Oh, okay. But yeah, what an interesting 3 films together to make The Boys in the Band, a kind of a small film with a large ensemble in kind of one space, to go from that to French Connection, and to go from French Connection to The Exorcist. 3 very different movies.
Right? I mean, yeah, and then when you look at the film that comes after The Exorcist, which I'm sure we'll get into when we start talking about his career, like it's such a weird trajectory. Even by 70s director standards, you're like, wow, what is going on? But but also like, I mean, the 1-2 punch of The French Connection, The Exorcist. I remember like being a kid, again, The Exorcist was another VHS discovery that, oh my God, The Exorcist is the scariest movie ever. And you were sort of like, okay, I have to gird up and see that. I'm a 12-year-old kid. I got to gird up and see this, bring this tape home, and do I dare watch it? And finally seeing it and being like, oh my God, this is the scariest thing my little kid mind has seen. This was the same guy. It's unbelievable.
Oh yeah. Like, I wonder if he had not won Best Director for French Connection. Like, was he? I don't even know if he was nominated for The Exorcist, but he was definitely worthy of winning for The Exorcist, because that 2 years later, just an astonishing feat of filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, I could go into. I wish I once upon a time I would have known this off the top of my head, and now I would need to go into a 5-minute IMDb deep dive to find it. But yeah, I mean, say what you will about his later films, or how erratic he would become, or some of his choices over the years. it's like the man knows how to direct. The man
Absolutely.
really, really knows how to set things up. He knows how to work with cinematographers. He knows how to work with editors.
Hmm.
He knows how to terrify actors and abuse them to get the performance that he wants. Just something he did with Gene Hackman for this. Like,
Yeah, I
you
read
know,
online that Gene Hackman, there were times where like Friedkin really had to do things to get this performance out of him that might be questionable today, right?
yeah, I mean, questionable in any day, really,
Any
but
day.
especially now. Yeah, the story that Friedkin keeps retelling is that Gene Hackman came from a small town. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a small town about 90 miles south of Chicago
Hmm.
in Illinois. And apparently, the town at one point had been a locus for a lot of Ku Klux Klan activity.
Okay.
So Gene Hackman grew up in an environment in which he was very cognizant of racism
Mm,
and very
right.
cognizant of, you know, racists who were terrorists
Hmm.
and causing problems within the community. And it really gave him like a lifelong hatred for that kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
then Hackman is then cast in this film in which he's got to play a guy who, let's say, has a complicated relationship with the African American community.
Yes, very
I'm
much
gonna
so.
I'm gonna put that as euphemistically as possible.
Yeah.
And you know, I think Friedkin tells the story about how they were shooting. I think it was the first day of shooting where Hackman had to slap around one of the people he was interrogating, and
Hmm.
they had to keep doing take after take after take of it.
Yeah.
And he was feeling really uncomfortable. Like he just didn't. This was like Hackman very early on was like, this guy Popeye Doyle is a racist, and I don't want to play him. Like I
Hmm.
don't. This is not something I want to be a part of. Even
Yeah.
though he wanted the role, there were certain
Hmm.
aspects of the role he wasn't comfortable with. And Friedkin showed him the dailies, and apparently all the dailies from the first day sucked. And
Which happens
was
sometimes.
which happens, and was sort of like, look, this isn't. You have to commit to this. This isn't working.
Yeah.
And the way the director tells it, it was like, I knew I had to get him angry, so he would start berating Hackman in between takes,
Hmm.
saying things like, "That's the best you've got? Well, I wouldn't quit your day job if I were you,"
Right. Hmm.
and goading him into a rage to get to the point where he had to match Popeye Doyle, like, and Popeye Doyle's an angry character. Like, even when he's not rousting suspects or whatever, he's an angry, obsessive character.
Yeah. Just a mad guy
He's
for
a
most of the
mad,
movie.
he's a
Yeah.
mad,
I also read that he would do like very simple things, like he would just groan or just be like, ugh, come
yeah,
on. You can
yeah,
do better than that. And this is pretty early in his film career. I mean, at this point, he was in Bonnie and Clyde in 67 in a
yeah,
supporting role, and he got fired from The Graduate.
yep, yep,
That's 67. And then the year before this is I Never Sang for My Father, which earned Hackman an Oscar nomination for
yeah,
supporting actor,
yeah.
even though he's the star of that film.
I think, yeah.
Which happens.
Once again, people think this messed up categorization for the Oscars is a new thing. Nope,
Yeah.
been around for literally been around for
Yeah.
decades.
So he'd had a couple breakthroughs up till now, but this is like his real big breakthrough, I think. This film, this is, maybe 4 years into his kind of long and fantastic film career. Did you know that there were other actors that were offered the lead role, including who turned it down? James Caan and Peter Boyle,
James
according to
Caan
what
I
I read
didn't
online.
James Caan I didn't know about.
Hmm.
Um, Although now I'm picturing the French Connection with James Caan in it, and I actually think he might be the only actor of that time who could make Popeye seem angrier. Like
Yeah.
I could see him really tapping into that. Yeah, and in fact, I think Friedkin has said over the years that he originally wanted Jackie Gleason. No, I'm
Really?
serious.
I didn't see
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Um, and the studio, I guess the studio, I don't know if it was the producers or if it was Fox,
Hmm.
but they were like, we're not doing this movie with Jackie Gleason. Jackie Gleason wanted to make this movie about a silent movie about a clown, and he made our lives hell, and so we refused to work with them. And then that
Hmm.
was when I think Peter Boyle had come into the
Oh,
equation
okay.
because Friedkin had seen Joe,
Joe the year
it's
before. Yeah.
another great early 70s
Hmm.
movie.
Really good. I like that. It was right before I started the podcast, but I watched it with Susan Sarandon's first role. It's really good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think she's in it with the man who became her husband. I don't think they were married at that point.
Oh,
The guy
okay.
who was Chris Sarandon. Don't quote
Mm-hmm.
me on that. And maybe I'd have to go back again. I got to go back to the IMDb for this kind of stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, a great movie. And excuse me. Apparently, Peter Boyle liked the role, but was like, I only want to do romantic comedies from now on. And Friedkin was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, it's just not for me.
Yeah.
And then apparently later, again, this is another Friedkin anecdote. So you got to print the legend here.
Yeah.
He had said that he had talked to somebody who worked on Everybody Loves Raymond, which is the sitcom that Peter Boyle played the dad
Yeah.
on.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, there wasn't a day that didn't go by when Peter Boyle didn't corner somebody and be like, I turned down the French Connection. And now I'm in this damn sitcom. That was the stupidest decision I ever made.
Yeah, I mean, I could see at the time. I mean, before this went into production, did anyone really know a lot about William Friedkin? You know, I could see like there's not like something there that in 1970, early 71, you would have said like, oh, this is going to be a modern classic. I don't know how you would know that about this movie at the time.
No, and I think in the same way that like Francis Ford Coppola had a couple of movies under his belt,
right,
before he made The Godfather,
mm-hmm.
and yet if you look at those movies and like something like the Rain People,
Finian's Rainbow, right?
Finian's Rainbow, which he got hired out of film school to do.
Yep.
He had a student film that feels very much like a student film of that time. Feels very much like a kind of trying to like surf the 60s, let your freak flag fly kind of zeitgeist.
Mm-hmm.
And then does Finian's Rainbow, and then does The Rain People, which is a wonderful,
great little film. Mm-hmm.
Great little film. But at no point do you think like, oh, this guy is going to go and make like one of the most, if not the most, like seminal American cinematic classic of the last, 55, 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It's kind of the same with Friedkin. Like, I don't necessarily know that you read.
Mm-hmm.
Let me try that again. I don't necessarily know that you see The Night They Raided Minsky's and go, oh, well, this guy is very clearly gonna make the French, like he's gonna be like a big new Hollywood director who's gonna win Oscars and like do two films that are gonna change American movies back to back. Like you just don't you don't think that.
Yeah, sometimes you don't know.
Right, and yet like he just kind of, for The French Connection is really where he kicks into gear.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, really great cast. Roy Scheider is also a part of this. This is 4 years before Jaws, but Roy Scheider was also in Clute from the summer of '71 with Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland, which is also a great film and a really great supporting performance Scheider gives in that movie too, by Alan J. Pakula, which we talked about in June.
It's funny to talk about Roy Scheider as being one of like the great underrated American actors, because he has a lead role in one of the single most famous Rosetta Stone of blockbuster cinema movies of the 70s. And he also stars in one of my another one of my favorite films of the 70s, All That Jazz. Bob Fosse. It's amazing. And yet I still don't think we give him enough credit.
Okay.
Like, I think he deserves to be talked about in the way that like somebody like John Cazale is talked about.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Who, again, like you always wonder what kind of amazing career Cazale would have had if he hadn't have passed away so early. But I feel like Scheider, like Roy Scheider, is really on that kind of level, even without being that sort of like method immersive type of actor.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a great American actor, and a great American actor working in the 70s during a great American filmmaking era. And and that was another thing, like rewatching the film last night, where I really I came to appreciate what he's doing in this film even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was not aware that Scheider had been nominated for an Academy Award for this, but he was for supporting actor for The French Connection.
That's right.
That was news to me when I looked this morning. I was like, oh, he was nominated too. Very cool. And then one other actor to talk about. Did you know this story? Fernando Rey, who plays the main villain, he was cast by mistake. Did you know this? This is what I read online, that William Friedkin wanted the guy from Belle de Jour, and the casting director got like the actors mixed up. He really wanted Francisco Rabal from that film, but the casting director thought he meant Fernando Rey.
Is that true?
So that's what I read online, and Friedkin was like, "Oh no, this isn't the person I want," and almost fired him. But then, like, changed his mind later and decided to cast him over Francisco. And I think Fernando Rey is great in this, and I can't really picture someone else in that role. So I thought that was a good choice too.
Not even somebody else with the same initials.
Yeah, exactly. I'm familiar with him from, we talked about one of the first episodes of the podcast was on the film Tristana by Louis Buñuel from last year, from 1970. And so he was phenomenal in that. And again, I hadn't seen this since French Connection since high school. So I'm like, oh, Fernando Rey is in this too. So that was cool to discover last night.
Fernando Rey waving goodbye to Gene Hackman as they play the cat and mouse game on the subway platform is it's just one of my favorite moments in the film. And I mean, Buñuel really tapped into what I will call like a very European sense of decadence about Fernando Rey. That really, I mean, it's interesting having seen all of this stuff with Buñuel to then go back to the French Connection and watch him, because you really do get this kind of sense of like, it's almost an old world courtliness mixed with this kind of inherent degeneracy. And that really sort of informs how you look at this character, who seems very courtly and very gentlemanly.
Yeah,
and it's like
very charming.
Give these lovely presents to his, I think his wife or girlfriend, whoever that is, when they're still in Marseille. And then, comes to New York and is essentially peddling heroin, that's going to go through like these very dodgy mafia types into like inner city neighborhoods.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a beautiful little like piece of casting that adds another layer to this movie.
So let's get into it. So what are our thoughts overall about this film and kind of its legacy over the last 50 years? Like, what did you, watching it again last night, what was your take on the French Connection?
It is a very, very different movie to watch in 2021 for a variety of reasons. Partially because of how familiar that character feels now after having seen decades and decades and decades of, cops on the edge. And obsessive cops who will, do anything, not just break the law, but like, bend it and twist it in order to, get who they're after. And then also having seen, like, at this point, decades of TV that have kind of taken that anti-hero character, that anti-hero type, and like made entire meals out of it. Like really just like, not just Tony Soprano, but like entire, entire like networks worth of difficult men, as Brett Martin called them. So in a way, like, it's interesting to see the lineage. Like you see that character coming in 1971, and you kind of know where that character type, how that character type is suddenly going to become like incredibly prevalent in the culture. And then there's the idea that you're watching two white cops in what appears to be a very heavily African American populated neighborhood. Go in and abuse their power and treat these people like animals, treat these citizens like animals, in a way that feels incredibly uncomfortable. Incredibly like, and knowing the way that like the power of the police has been abused. I mean, obviously that the problems with police and certain communities do not stop and start with George Floyd or BLM or even the 92 riots, like, or even the 68 riots and Watts. Like, it goes on and on and on. And I can picture being in like a 1971 audience, with like the Nixon Law and Order types, the same people who flocked to Dirty Harry and were like, that's how you get things done.
2 months later, Dirty Harry is December of 71. Exactly.
It's almost like it's priming the pump in a lot of ways. And that same audience really kind of rooting for Popeye Doyle, being like, that's how you have to keep law and order. And yet seeing some of those scenes and just kind of now you kind of it's hard not to just cringe.
Right.
And
There's
be
like two.
this is,
There's two scenes where you're just
yes.
like, oh, this is not aged very well. Right.
No, and
Yeah.
it's funny. After I watched the film last night, I went back to another film that has a scene in it that's it's almost like an answer track
Mm-hmm.
to the scene of Gene Hackman going into the bar in I think it's Harlem and rousting all those folks, which just ends up being an excuse to talk to his stool pigeon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the scene in 48 Hours, the
Oh.
Walter Hill film in the early
Mm-hmm.
80s, where Eddie Murphy goes into the redneck bar.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's very consciously designed to kind of be the reverse of that scene in The French Connection.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great point.
Yeah, and to watch those two back to back, like you really do kind of see how there was sort of like, yeah, that other scene, like this is how we're going to do it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like this is the chance to kind of turn the coin, as it were.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think was really innovative about the movie at the time in 71 when this came out? Like what was kind of innovative that audiences hadn't really seen before in a crime drama like this one? Like what was kind of new about this movie?
I mean, besides the anti-hero trope, I think the real big thing that distinguishes this film and ends up being incredibly influential to at least to American movies, because European films were already doing this, is the sense that it was shot like a documentary.
Right.
In a lot of ways, it's not surprising because Friedkin's background is from documentary filmmaking.
The camera work in this is insane. I absolutely loved it. Like the camera work in this.
Can we talk about Owen Roizman for a second, the cinematographer of this movie? Hold on. I recognized the name when I was going through the credits of the film last night and was sort of like, oh yeah, I think that's the guy that also shot The Exorcist. And then I looked up what he did, and I'm kind of surprised. I mean, like there's like a roll call of 70s cinematographers that everyone always talks about, where it's like, oh yeah, Conrad Hall and Gordon Willis,
right?
And, Vittorio Storaro, and then this guy Owen Roizman, he shot The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 and Network and The Exorcist,
wow,
and The Heartbreak Kid, and 3 Days of the Condor, and Straight Time, and Taps, and Tootsie, and True Confessions, and that's maybe a third of his output, or maybe a quarter of his output. Like any one of those movies, and again, like the Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 and 3 Days of the Condor alone, you really understand like what he's doing with light here and what he's doing with camera work, and how he's using that to give you insight into the characters and really work with the genre and create suspense. Like it's absolutely amazing. But yes, it was a very calculated move by Friedkin, from what he said, that he wanted to give it a very kind of rough hewn, you are there almost but not quite, like shaky cam kind of feel.
Yeah, I mean there are scenes in this where they're running and they're like, the cameraman is like running alongside of them. Yeah. It's a really kind of guerrilla filmmaking attitude for a lot of this. I wrote at one point, I'm like, man, some of this feels like an indie guerrilla movie that had no studio behind it or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's that great shot early on when Hackman's dressed up as Santa.
And Roy it's a great introduction to him.
Yeah, he really is. The baddest of bad Santas. And Roy Scheider's selling hot dogs when they're undercover, and the guy that they're staking out is like running away, and the camera's kind of running alongside him as he's running, and then it immediately cuts to like the two cops running, and it's running alongside them. And it's one of those shots I feel like I've seen a million times, but even just watching it last night, it was sort of like, oh wow, that must have been like, I don't know if that's the first time I ever did it, but it was certainly like the most effective use of it.
Yeah.
And there's another, like, I'm sure we'll get into like one's favorite scenes for The French Connection. And there's so many great scenes to pick, not just the chase scene, but like so many wonderful scenes to get into with the film. But it wasn't until I watched it again last night that I really zeroed in on. So there's the point where Fernando Rey's associate has got a rifle and is on the roof of those apartment projects and is shooting at Gene Hackman.
Oh my God, shocking scene.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like really that first death when he shoots the
mom, like the mother, and she falls over. I think she's dead, right? And then you hear the baby crying. That's like really horrifying moment.
Yeah, and the people are coming to aid her, and he keeps yelling like, "Don't leave her alone! Get out of here! Like scatter!" So that gets the scene, and it kind of, it eventually sets up what's going to become the famous car chase scene.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a scene where he's trying to evade the sniper, and the sniper eventually gets off the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those scenes where the camera's running along. He starts running after him, like down the street, Popeye Doyle, and the camera's running alongside him, but there's no real sound. Like you maybe hear like a couple of cars going by, but there's no music. The sound isn't like, the traffic noises aren't cranked up so that you feel have that claustrophobic city feel that you get when you hear that traffic noise, like buffering a soundtrack. It's almost eerily peaceful and quiet as he's like running after this guy who's just killed innocent civilians and has tried to kill him. And it was just one of those kind of things where I was like, oh my God, what a choice. What an amazing choice to do that. Like, it's such a grace note.
Instead of bringing in the fast music, the fast cutting, turning it into like, okay, here we go, big action sequence. Like Friedkin made a different choice to make that scene more resonating.
Right. And like, and the scene that follows is that you just described the chase scene, essentially, where it's like that music and the sound and everything, and like Jerry Greenberg's impeccable editing. And how, I mean, again, like, to break out another Friedkin story, he had said that he had seen, I saw him do, you can find this on YouTube, but he does a Q&A with Christopher McQuarrie.
Okay.
And Christopher McQuarrie's asking him about filming the chase scene. And he had said that they filmed the chase scene, and he was watching the dailies and a kind of rough cut of it together and was like, yeah, this isn't doing it for me. I feel like we need to get something else here. We need to add more to it. So he mounted a camera to, like, I guess the front bumper, put a camera in the passenger side. And I think he had said that he was kind of leaning out of one of the windows with a camera. And he had Bill Hickman, who was a driver for the film. And apparently also one of the drivers for Bullet as well.
Oh, there you go.
Drive 26 blocks at 90 miles per hour, just down regular Brooklyn traffic, and filmed all of it. And he said, he goes, to be fair, we had a police light on. So it wasn't,
they knew to get away.
Pedestrians could very clearly tell that like something was happening. But that once he did that, and then they edited that footage in, like we have the chase scene. We basically have the chase scene that has become iconic.
Oh, that's interesting. So they shot it once, and then they looked at the footage and said it needs something else, and they went back. Was it the same like street that they used for the previous part, and then they added these new shots?
I believe so, yeah. And I believe that like the footage from the first shoot they did is still in there.
I
think it was more just like we need
with Hackman and stuff.
Exactly. Hackman, a lot of those, like some of those driving scenes, some of the scenes where the camera's in front of the car and you're seeing the car driving towards it.
I read that a car that gets hit is like an actual person just driving. Like they had to like pay for the repairs. But like the part where he sees the carriage and he turns, that was orchestrated, that was rehearsed.
Yes.
That was not an accident or anything.
Yeah.
Which I was happy to read that. I was like, okay, good. That would have been a bit much.
Friedkin said that's the only kind of pre-planned thing that they did. And obviously you need to pre-plan something like that. You're not just going to be like, hey, look at that woman with a baby stroller.
And watching
we got film in the cameras, right? The cameras are rolling. Like, it's even by Friedkin standards, that's a little too gonzo.
Watching that brief moment last night, I'm like, oh, and then finally, a couple decades later in Speed, they would actually hit the carriage. But it's not actually a baby inside.
Like when John Carpenter gets the kid shot in Assault on Precinct 13. Like if John Carpenter makes the French Connection, then that baby gets hit.
Yeah, if Carpenter had been at a point in his career where he could have made French Connection in 70, 71, I think you're right. I think the carriage would have gone flying in the air. Oh, Carpenter. Yes, yeah, anything more about that very famous scene? It was actually, it's funny, watching the movie last night, it was my second favorite scene of the movie, was the car chase. I mean, I remembered it very well. What I forgot was so great about it is how he cuts back and forth between Hackman driving and the guy in the subway, and that back and forth is what really makes it exciting, because you're not, if we're just with Hackman for that whole drive, it'd be exciting, but then you add in this other element, and like he's just trying to catch up to the subway, and it's great. I mean, it's really fantastic. Holds up fantastic 50 years on.
Yeah, and the scene with like Hackman doesn't know that he's told the subway driver to essentially blow through the next stop, which is why you get the great scene of like Hackman, parking the car, jumping out of the car and like running up to the thing and just seeing the train. Like he's like, finally, okay, now I can get him, and like the train just whizzes by.
Yeah, and then he goes back to the car.
I do want to see an alternate movie, and it just really needs to be like a 15-20 minute short, but I want to see an alternate movie of some guy in a brown sedan that's just minding his own business and driving, and it's like 5 to 10 minutes of him driving, and then suddenly in the windshield a cop appears and is like, police business, get out, I need the car.
Yeah.
And the guy is like rudely taken out of his car and then just watches some guy in a pork pie hat like drive off in his car. And then it's just another 10 minutes of him being like, where do I pick up my car? Like,
yeah, he actually doesn't he ask him like before Hackman gets in, like he's like, so where do I pick it up? Like,
where do I pick it up? And he just takes off,
and of course then he's just banging the car every which way. By the time he's finally done, the car is just destroyed.
It's not Popeye's car. He doesn't care.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got a perp to catch.
But yeah, that's a great sequence. And then the main poster, right, is, as you said, the one of the guy getting shot in the back, like falling to his knees on that staircase. And that's how the sequence ends. After, I mean, what is it, 7-8 minutes? It's long. Like it starts when he's being shot at, and it goes right into it's a long sequence.
Oh, well, I think if you count that as part of the chase scene, if you start it from him coming back to his apartment, he's like just been reassigned or taken off the assignment, and he's kind of strolling back to his apartments before the first gunshot. You count that, I think it's closer to like 10 or 12 minutes.
Yeah.
I think the chase itself is something like 7 to 8.5, somewhere around there. But yeah, just and then you finally get to the thing of this guy kind of staggering, and then Hackman's staggering, and they both you see them, and he's coming down the side of the stairs, and he sees Hackman, and Hackman's like that great shot where Hackman's like has his gun and then just kind of slumps against the side because they're both just so exhausted.
Yeah.
And then the guy turns, and like, I mean, talk about framing.
Yeah.
It's so great of the guy getting shot in the back and his arms go up in this like Jesus Christ pose, and oh my God, it's like that's why you make it the poster shot.
Yeah. I also find it interesting that it's not the closing of the movie, that there's still another 20-30 minutes to go after that. It's not like it's the finale. It feels like a finale in a way, but it's not.
there's a lot, and I mean, again, I've seen this film a number of times, but it had been a long time since I'd seen it.
Yeah.
So going back to it tonight, it comes to that thing, and you're kind of left on this like massive, there's a huge adrenaline rush of a chase scene, and then you come down to this thing, and you're just sort of like, oh, okay, right. So like at this point, it's just got to be an epilogue, because where do you go from there?
Yeah.
And I'd kind of forgotten there was like a whole other 20-25 minutes of like them finding the heroin in the car and trying to figure out where they're keeping it, and then the whole meetup at the thing before they go to it, and then the great scene of like them, Fernando Rey driving away, and they finally made this deal. He can go back to France and hang out with his gorgeous girlfriend, and they can exchange more gifts with each other. And then sure enough, as he's going over the hill, you just see a line of cops and Gene Hackman in a pork pie just waiting for him. Oh, it's so good.
And just a fantastic planting and payoff where we get Fernando Rey waving to him from the subway, and then the wave from Hackman is so great. I did not know that was coming, and I was like, yes, that was great. I bet audiences went crazy in the theater when that came out.
Oh, I'm sure
that moment when Hackman waves back at him.
I have to ask though, you said that the car chase scene is your second favorite scene of the French Connection. What's your first?
My favorite is the scene in the subway where Fernando Rey and Gene Hackman are they keep coming out and back in, out and back in, and the way that ends with Fernando Rey just stepping out and then back in, like just before, and then like Hackman can't even contain himself, he's just pounding on let me in, and then the wave is so great. I thought the suspense of that, what is that, 4 or 5 minutes, like that was great. Just Hackman following Ray over to the thing, he's like, oh, I'm gonna get a grape juice, and like you can tell like Fernando Rey isn't necessarily picking up on it at first, but at some point, he's like, okay, this guy is following me.
Yeah, there's a point.
The suspense is great for that.
There's a point, I think, maybe 15, 20 minutes earlier than that scene where he says like, I think the guy made me. He's like, what do you say? I'm on frog one.
Yeah.
And
Frog one.
I think he made me. It's like when he's first casing him at the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, then the sequence is only maybe 4 minutes in the subway platform.
Yeah.
But there's an entire buildup.
Yeah.
Where like Fernando
He
Reyes
sees
looking in
him.
the window, and he's kind of he sees him, and then he loses him at one point, and then it just has the great thing of like you keep seeing the umbrella or the walking stick that he's got. I forget which I think it's a walking stick, and how you just keep seeing that going, and that's how he keeps following him because he keeps losing him. And then you finally get to the point where they're both in the subway and like going in and out of cars. It's just
and I just love the use of silence. There's not very much dialogue. It's very much about like voyeurism. And I even wrote at one point, there are some like Hitchcockian touches in this. Like there's a lot of like Hackman looking across the street back to Hackman, like a lot of like shots of him just watching things, and you see it kind of going over in his mind. And there's a lot of that in this movie. There's a lot of moments of just silence, not a lot of music, where we just watch Hackman thinking, which is really fun too.
Yeah, really great use of first person perspective too. There's a lot of great scenes of like Hackman looking for him, where the shot's on Hackman, and then it cuts to his point of view as he looks down a street, and you just see a jumble of people, and then it cuts back to him, and he looks right, and it cuts down to a different street POV, a different thing, and like and then when he goes down in the first subway and he's looking for him, and it keeps cutting to the POV shot of him like looking around, and you're just seeing like empty stalls, and it's so great.
Yeah. So what do you think Gene Hackman brings to this? Like what makes him so effective in this role, do you think?
Oh man, well, I mean, you're talking about the person who is arguably the greatest living American actor today. I mean,
phenomenal.
His only competition is maybe Robert Duvall at this point, and and like I think Duvall occasionally still does stuff. Nicholson's retired, Hackman's retired, but like to me, like Hackman's kind of he's like the great American actor of the last 50 years. What he brings to this, that's a good question. He understands how to tap into that rage, even though according to Friedkin, he had to like goad him into it. There's a kind of Midwestern everyman quality to him, but also this ability to kind of Hackman had a lot of pain in his background. He's talked a lot about this, and you get the sense that Popeye is a very damaged individual.
Yeah.
And I think Hackman really understands how to do that. And he does it, there are times when he does it very broadly, where you've got Popeye just yelling and screaming and, violently accosting people.
Yeah.
And then you've got other points too, where you can just see, like one of my favorite shots in the film, and I kind of remember seeing this as a kid and then really, really glomming onto it when I watched it last night, is Popeye waking up at a bar. And think about that phrase. He's waking up in a bar.
Exactly. Yeah.
Walking out into the exterior, which is very clearly morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is another kind of like, slightly dodgy thing to watch now, but like you see him sort of checking out the young woman on the bike as he's in his car after, literally sleeping head first in a dive bar, like on the bar. And then you get the great kind of back and forth between him and Roy Scheider as Hackman, who's clearly had a night of, to quote another 70s movie, of carnal knowledge. Like waking up with his foot handcuffed to the bed.
Yeah, I love that part. I was like, what?
You get such a great sense of like the partnership between these two guys in that sequence. As weird as some of the other aspects of that sequence are, some of the queasier aspects of that sequence, like it's a really great way for you to have an idea about how close these guys are, what kind of partnerships like, how they vote each other.
Something I really loved about it, like it gives us these little glimpses of like their private lives, and we get behavior between them. There's a scene where they're just laughing that I really liked. And but I feel like another screenwriter, another director might have given us 30 minutes of the movie where we're exploring like Hackman's like home life and more about his like, you know, him reflecting on who he is as a person. And I kind of like that we just get these little glimpses, but it's not overly done. Like really the focus is on his mission of what he's trying to accomplish in the movie. And we just get these little brief flashes of like what his messy private life is too. That was good.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I don't think there doesn't seem to be much of a distinction between his private life and his professional.
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of intertwined.
Like the whole idea is like, hey, Schreider, let's go get a drink at a bar, and you know, he's casing the joint. He's very clearly like got his eye on some guy, and they're suspicious of him. The Sal and Angie duo.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like that, the pursuit is his life. I mean, again, that's another thing that you've come to grow accustomed to with these stories of like either the cop and the criminal, and they're both, you know, two sides of the same coin kind of thing, or the cop who's like, you know, going to obsessively pursue his perp no matter what. And Hackman, I guess there are other actors who could have portrayed that obsessiveness with an equal amount of authenticity and an equal amount of depth, but I feel like it takes an actor of Hackman's caliber, especially at that moment, to really give it the kind of edge that he gives it here.
Yeah. Any other scenes that you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on? Like, I think the last scene is really striking of them. It's like that abandoned warehouse and them running around, and we can, you know, the movie's 50 years old. We can give away the ending if we want, but just that last 5 minutes is it's like the location that they use at the end, kind of an eerie place to end the film.
The location at the end where it really is this incredibly decrepit, decrepit place where they've had this meetup in the middle of what feels like the middle of nowhere. It ends up being like the scene of this massive cop shootout. It's less that the scene strikes me per se than the two things that happen near the end of that scene. One is which, and again, I don't think this is giving it away, is like Hackman's cop shoots another cop. And there clearly seems to be like he's clearly trying to like cover up what's happening, much to his partner's dismay. And the second thing, and again, like I've seen this film before, and yet it still gives me goosebumps when I see this ending. You see him run into the darkness, you hear a gunshot, and then it just starts giving like a kind of like a rap sheet, you know, credits roll, where it's like, here's what happened to everybody. And the fact of the matter is they didn't catch their man.
Right.
It doesn't end with this like great, I mean, you have the great cathartic moment of Fernando Rey coming over the hill and Gene Hackman waving to him, but then like
he gets away.
They don't get their man. In fact, the man they get is one of their own, which starts a whole other, you know, moral quandary. And the film ends with them not having a in a way, like the pursuit was almost for nothing. Yes, it got the heroin off the street and it busted up the ring, and Fernando Rey gets away. And I think I'd just kind of forgotten how beautifully pessimistic, how perfectly
I was like, really
cynical 70s that ending is.
Yeah. So when it ended, I'm like, oh, does this mean I have to watch French Connection 2?
Well, yes, you do.
I have not seen the second one.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Okay.
It's great. It's an entirely different movie.
Is Fernando Rey in the sequel?
I can't remember. I don't
think does that character come into play at all, or it's like a completely different
story? So I really wish I rewatched the French Connection 2 last night as well. I forget if he's in it. I know that Popeye goes to France looking for him and ends up getting hooked on heroin himself.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I believe that came out in 75.
I was 75, and I think John Frankenheimer is the director of it. Again, a guy who knows his way around like suspense in a chase scene. And it's wonderful. The French Connection 2 is one of those movies that I caught up with like long after the fact. I might have even been in my 30s when I finally kind of came around to seeing it. And you know, it was like one of those things where I put off seeing it for ages because I was like, I don't want to see a sequel to the French Connection. Like the film doesn't need a sequel. And when you've been burned by Exorcist 2, The Heretic, you know, you tend to get you're a little gun shy on that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's its own it doesn't try to be the French Connection at all. It's its own beast, and
Okay.
that just makes me admire it all the more. It's not a superior sequel. I mean, I'm not going to act like it's Godfather 2, but like it's a really, you should definitely check it out.
It's
a really
it's interesting that there is a sequel. Like I'm like, oh, that's right, with Hackman. It's not a different cast or something. It's Hackman. So yeah, I'm gonna definitely check that out. So before we get to the end of our conversation on the French Connection, if you have any kind of final words to say about William Friedkin's job as director here, anything else you wanted to say about what he did well, what he kind of brought to this movie over maybe what another director could have brought to French Connection?
It's a good question, and only because it makes me think of what other directors would have done with it.
Yeah, like
Carpenter.
You know
what I mean? Like yeah, like Carpenter. But I'm trying to think of like directors that would have been like, could Sidney Lumet, who had a very good feel for these kind of stories and in that city, would he have made something that was as good or better than Friedkin did it?
Mm-hmm.
In a way, I don't think so. And like, you won't find a bigger Sidney Lumet stand than me. But like, there was something about the kind of live wire edginess, the energy, the kind of like seat of your pants sort of feel that Friedkin brings to the French Connection that I think gives it that little something special that makes it stand out from something that I think other directors would have given it. And again, this is it's hard to remember that this film starts in Marseille.
Right. Yeah, there's like moments of the first hour where we're in like France, like we're like there's subtitles and we're just kind of hanging out with Fernando Rey, and it's like that's like that too. Yeah,
it's this whole kind of leap of faith that like you're watching a great New York cop movie, but we're gonna give you a guy literally buying a baguette in France.
yeah. We do not open with Gene Hackman. Like we open in France, and we open with a really visceral shot of a guy getting his head shot with bloods going everywhere. I don't know if you know, like watching this last time, like, oh, this is another early 70s movie where the blood looks kind of fake, but it works for this movie. I don't know. It meshes in with what's going on.
Yeah. What's the thing that Godard says, where it's like, it's not blood, it's red.
It's red.
And that's very much, there's a lot of spilled red in this film.
Yeah.
But it's the same. He does the same thing in The Exorcist. Like The Exorcist opens in I think it's Iran, right, where they're doing the excavation.
Yeah.
And you're like, thought I was watching a movie about a little girl who like vomits pea soup and screams obscenities at priests. What are we doing, in the Middle East? And it's this great thing that kind of sets up, everything that comes before it. But it's this weird, almost kind of misleading thing that he's doing that pays off later. And that's it's clearly, I would venture that was something that he sort of learned how to do in the French Connection. In a lot of ways, I don't think you get that kind of cold opening that you get in The Exorcist unless he'd sort of done a dry run for it.
Yeah, but such an extraordinary job Friedkin did with this. And the film won 5 Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Hackman, Screenplay, and Film Editing. I don't know how familiar you are with the films that were nominated that year. Do you think this was the right choice for that year? This was like Last Picture Show, Fiddler on the Roof, A Clockwork Orange was nominated. Like, do you think like the French Connection was the deserved winner for 71? Like Last Picture Show, I'm recording an episode on that in a couple weeks, and it's been a while, but I remember really loving that film. So I'll be curious to see. It's very different, obviously, than this movie.
Like The Last Picture Show is the only film that maybe gives this serious competition.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Clockwork Orange is great. I think Fiddler on the Roof is Fiddler on the Roof.
At this point, I have not seen it yet. I am recording an episode on Fiddler on the Roof. I'm a little nervous when I saw the 3-hour runtime, but we'll see how it goes.
Oh, it's a proper 70s musical with a proper 70 musicals length.
Yeah. I mean, I think in this time, in this period, if this movie had come out a year later, I don't know if it would have won over The Godfather, but we'll never know.
No, I mean, that's quite an alternate history with those two films kind of going neck and neck at each other. I mean, what an incredible year for movies that would have been. Like whoever loses, we all win. Essentially,
for sure. Yeah.
It was like when. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say like you would get this occasionally in the '90s where it was like There Will Be Blood going up against No Country for Old Men.
Oh right, in 07. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and you're sort of thinking like, okay, well, it's we should have such dilemmas that these two great, like one of these two great movies stands a very big, a big chance of winning the Best Picture Oscar.
Yeah.
As opposed to, some sort of prestige picture Oscar bait mediocrity.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, well deserved. Coming off of Patton had won Best Picture the year before, which is a more kind of Hollywood kind of epic war story, and this is like, I feel like one of the early examples of like a more modern film that would win picture, director, actor for Hackman. This is the only time Hackman won an Oscar for lead actor. He would go on to win supporting actor for Unforgiven, another great performance he gave in the 90s. But
I would say that it was deservedly a good win for Unforgiven, but as you know, deserves got nothing to do with it.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, so yeah, that takes us to our final two segments here. The first one's called the Divine Double Feature, where we pick a more modern film to pair with our film today, French Connection. What movie did you choose for that?
Well, it's funny. So my temptation was to go the easy, which is a nice way of saying lazy route, and to pick a 2014 French film called The Connection.
Oh, okay.
Which is sort of kind of loosely based story-wise on the French Connection, and it's essentially about that gang in France in the early 70s that was importing, poppies from Turkey and making heroin and selling it in New York, and how there is a detective in France, played by Jean Dujardin, the artist, who is obsessively going after this gang and its leader. But I am going to pick something a little different, partially because it's a film that I don't think gets nearly enough lip service or credit these days, and partially because, sorry, I'm just double checking the date of it. Okay, lovely. And partially because I think that in a way it makes for a better double feature, and that's a movie from 2012 called Killing Them Softly.
Oh, okay. Is that the one with Brad Pitt?
It's with Brad Pitt and James Gandolfini.
Yeah, that's right.
And Scoot McNairy and the great Ben Mendelsohn and and Ray Liotta. I mean, it's a good cast.
Yeah.
And it's essentially the story of these two. It's based off a George V. Higgins novel who wrote The Friends of Eddie Coyle, which is one of my favorite novels ever. And it's essentially the story of these two kind of knucklehead thugs and heroin addicts who decide they're going to rip off a mafia card game. Because they know that the guy who runs the card game has he's hired people to rip off the card players before, to rob them, and then basically he gets a cut. So they figure like he's going to get blamed for this. We can go ahead and do this and then get away scot-free. And then Brad Pitt plays a hitman. It's essentially brought in by the people who were ripped off to kind of figure out what happened and finish the job and kill these guys. And it takes place right as the kind of McCain-Obama elections happening. And it's so gritty and dirty looking and very pulpy. And there's something about the kind of look and feel and vibe of it that makes it almost feels like if you weren't hearing the snatches of Obama's speeches, you would think that it was like a lost 70s movie.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And so that was what I think that would make a really good, if you wanted to keep that great scuzz buzz going for two films, I think Killing Them Softly is really the one to go.
Killing Them Softly. Yeah, I saw that film. I think I watched it on DVD, and yeah, really striking performance by Pitt and Gandolfini, and just really terrific film from the early 2010s. That's a great choice. I also picked a film from the early 2010s. My favorite film from 2011, Drive, with Ryan Gosling, which I think would be kind of a cool pairing with French Connection, more style, but also kind of a crime drama. Really great villain performance by Albert Brooks, who I love in Drive, and just a lot of cool style in that movie. I haven't seen it in maybe 8 years. I don't know if it still holds up in 2021, but I really loved it at the time.
Drive, I'm sure there are aspects of it that I feel like the scene with Albert Brooks stabbing the guy and then being like, and then kind of comforting him as he's dying, being like, it's okay.
It's okay, man.
It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be over very soon.
Yeah.
Like, that's timeless. I don't know if there are other aspects of Drive that hold up. I mean, it's a very postmodern film.
Yeah.
A very postmodern take on that genre, but like, oh yeah, there's so much great stuff in that movie.
Yeah, but I might watch that again because it's celebrating its 10th anniversary, like just right now. Like it's been exactly 10 years.
How about you put it on now, and then you and I will just silently watch it together, and then just keep the cameras rolling.
Just keep the cameras rolling.
I feel like YouTube viewers would like that.
That's a great idea.
Turn it into a Warhol movie.
That's fantastic. All right, so that takes us to our final segment. Just a few words about William Friedkin. We talked about him a little bit at the beginning in terms of his career and his earlier films before French Connection, past French Connection and The Exorcist. Any other films you'd recommend to our listeners? Like maybe some films that not everyone has seen. I still have not seen Sorcerer from '77. I've heard some interesting things about it.
You do not know what you're missing.
Okay. Because there's like a Blu-ray with like a lot of cool bonus features, and like I want to check it out.
Yeah, Sorcerer is one of those movies where I know I can't decide, and I feel like the kind of movie loving community in general can't decide whether it's like a lost masterpiece,
yeah,
or whether it's just like an incredibly flawed diamond.
Because that was the film after The Exorcist, right? That was like 4 years later, also with Roy Scheider, right?
That's the film it's a remake of The Wages of Fear.
Okay,
and that's the film that he basically spends all of his capital.
Yeah,
literally and figuratively.
Goodwill.
Making, and it is a huge, massive disaster. But again, and it's been a while since I've seen it, but I've seen it at least once within the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have to, if you ignore the reputation, you can find some really, really great scenes in it, really great moments.
Okay.
Really lovely turn by Roy Scheider. Like, it's just, I don't want to be like, it's the great forgotten masterpiece and let's put it, it deserves to be in the canon. Like, let's not go that far.
Yeah.
But it's definitely one of those Friedkin movies where you're sort of like, you understand why it is a great example of folly, of 70s filmmaker folly. Yeah. And it is also a great example of like, there's so many things in there where you're like, oh, this is what Friedkin does and does really well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't not give a shout out to Killer Joe.
Yes.
Which is Friedkin's later adaptation of a Tracy Letts play that almost feels like it was made for Friedkin to put together. And I'd probably say the same thing about Bug.
Yeah. Bug is on my top. Like, I really loved Bug. I saw it at the LA Film Festival, and I lived in LA in 2006. And he presented it with Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon, right, is the lead of that film. Yeah. It's a really interesting, disturbing movie. Right,
but the film I would pick, if I was going to do a Friedkin double feature and not just like a thematic or a feeling double feature, is the sort of unofficial companion piece to the French Connection, which is To Live and Die in LA.
Live and Die in LA. Yeah.
To Live and Die in LA to me is like the greatest. The greatest is a lot. It's one of the three greatest examples of an 80s version of a 70s movie. Because if you were to describe the film to somebody, it sounds like a 70s movie. But the minute that Wang Chung score starts up, and the minute you cut to like these scenes in like a dance club, or it's like a dance performance because one of the characters' girlfriends is a dancer, with all these people in makeup doing these like almost geometric dances to like very 80s cokey synth music.
Yeah.
It's definitely a Reagan era film. There's no way that it's not an 80s movie. But it's great. In a lot of ways, it was like him trying to do the French Connection in Los Angeles. And I know that sounds very like reductive, but again, it's an obsessive, in this case, not a cop, but a Secret Service person whose partner, one of his mentor is essentially killed by Willem Dafoe, who plays an artist who's a counterfeiter. He's one of these artists where he does these like abstract expressionist kind of portrait paintings and then burns them. And then his side hustle is he's an expert counterfeiter, like one of the best in LA. And William Peterson's mentor ends up getting killed by him. And so William Peterson and his new partner decide that they're going to catch this guy come hell or high water.
Mhm.
And it's also got, it's got a flawed anti-hero
Mhm.
for a lead, an obsessive, a very kind of dapper criminal, a dapper degenerate criminal in his own way. Great Willem Dafoe, like very early Willem Dafoe too, but like
Right.
great Willem
Mhm.
Dafoe performance. And it's got a wonderful chase scene right in the middle of it.
Yeah, didn't Friedkin like try to up the ante on what he did in French Connection with the chase in To Live and Die in L.A.? Like, isn't the car going backwards, if I remember correctly?
No, well, the car's going
that...
against
it's
traffic.
going against traffic. That's right.
on a freeway,
Yeah.
on like an overpass and a bridge, I think, at one point.
Yeah.
And it's very clearly, like, again, filmed from the passenger seat, very clearly barreling its way through. And I think the chase scene kind of starts off more or less in like the LA reservoir.
Okay.
Which is one of the most, like, you know, cliche settings for anything in LA. Like, how many times have you seen that? And he somehow makes this kind of chase scene, which turns into this like ambush, seem like totally new and exciting and wonderful. And then it gets to the part where, to evade these guys, he has to drive 90 miles an hour against traffic.
Yeah.
Which, if you've ever been on the 405, just feels like a Tuesday.
That's just like exactly. Yeah,
But
that's a great piece of work.
Yeah, it's a great companion piece too.
Yeah. And if I had to pick my favorite Friedkin film, it would be The Exorcist. I'm a huge horror fan. I just think that movie is just phenomenal. And I can't wait to talk about it on the podcast in 2 years, in 73. Came out in the day after Christmas, which always makes me laugh.
Oh yeah, I mean,
came out December 26, 1973.
That movie has to come out on a holy day.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, there's no two ways about it.
But I can't, like, celebrating Christmas. Okay, Mom, let's go see the new film. Like, oh my God, I can't imagine. I've read stories of people passing out and throwing up in the theater. I cannot imagine.
Yeah.
In late 73, what people were making of The Exorcist.
Just mayhem.
But we will get to that. Thank you so much, David, for being on my episode about the French Connection. I wanted a great guest for this one. It's our Best Picture winner of 71, and this was a fantastic conversation. Do you have anything you'd like to promote or tell our listeners where they can find you online? Now would be the time. Be fantastic.
Yeah, you can find my work on rollingstone.com and in occasionally in the magazine that still is coming out every month. I think I've got a piece coming out in December that I'm very excited about, and a couple of big things coming up, and weekly reviews and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's you can read me there. The only thing to promote is this. I think this has just been a fabulous conversation. I've had so much fun. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. This was a lot of fun, and I'd love to have you back at some point. There's a lot of great films of the 70s to get to, and just a real thrill to have you on today, David. So thank you.
Thanks a bunch. Take care.
Yeah. So thanks for being here, David. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.